being here. Dan, thank you for extending the invitation for me to be here, but just thank you for planning this event. It was a blessing to me to just to sit out and listen to Dan's opening address and listen to the piano. Really excellent job, super insightful, and really important and practical. I hope that what I have to share with you as we close this afternoon will be practical as well. I didn't know how much your minds would be taxed at this point in time, and so I wrote most of what I'm going to say down, partly so you could just track with me, but also so that you could have something pretty tangible to take from here. I didn't email Dan and ask if I would have access to PowerPoint slides or anything like that. So as I started working on this, I just decided to put most of it down. So you should all have a handout with the 3 points that I want to cover. But as Dan kind of mentioned, my interest in this topic about Christianity in the classroom stems from my own experience, not just as a student in the classroom. I became a Christian in 1992 when I was 22 years old, while a student at Ball State. And so that was really transformative for me. I might take a moment to share that in a little while, but I might forget as well. But that's okay. If you have questions about that, you can ask. But also, my interest in the topic is from serving in physiology and health science for 9 years as well, while I was doing college ministry at a local church, Westminster Presbyterian Church in Muncie. And so trying to help the students at Westminster integrate their faith and their following of Jesus into their life as a student. And so I think sometimes we can think of being a college student as preparatory, rightly thought of as being preparatory in some way for long-term vocation, but it's not only that. Being a student is itself a calling during this particular season in your life. In other words, God isn't simply calling you to be faithful 5 years from now, once you're done with college and doing what you feel like you're called to do. He's calling you to be faithful now in this season of your life of preparation, distinctively as a student. So I just want to explore what might that look like to be faithful as a disciple of Jesus during this season that you're a student. And so I'm going to piggyback a little bit on some of the things that the excellent panel already shared. But I want to share with you 3 concepts that I think you need to embrace if you're going to be a faithful Christian student. And they're all there on your handout. So the first one is that you just have to recognize that you are a worker. You're a worker. And so a number of things I just have underneath this first main point. Commit yourself to the hard work of academic study. If you want to know how to be a faithful Christian follower of Jesus in the classroom, the first step you can take is commit yourself to the hard work of academic study and believe that this commitment to working hard as a student is honoring and pleasing to the Lord who has called you to that at this particular season in your life. That that's what he wants you to do, to commit to the hard work of academic study. Letting your study slide because you happen to be more interested in quote-unquote spiritual pursuits, which again, I think the panel did a nice job of talking about sacred, secular distinctions. Letting your study slide as a result of that, I don't think is honoring the Lord who's called you to be a student at this point in your life. And it's also probably not honoring your parents if your parents are paying for your college education to listen. Just let your work in the classroom slide for, again, quote-unquote, more spiritual kinds of pursuits. And so a couple of things that this commitment should look like or express itself in is attend your classes faithfully. Have a really good reason to miss a class, or don't miss it. Because again, that's committing to the hard work. If you've got an 8 o'clock, get up for your 8 o'clock class and attend that class as faithfully as you can. Complete your course readings and assignments. Polish your papers. We talked a little bit about the importance of reading and writing, and I was talking with Dan just a little bit. It's hard to write a good paper, and you're not going to get it right the first time you write it, so you've got to polish it. And then you've got to go back and you've got to polish it again. And then you've got to go back and you've got to polish it again. And make sure that paper says what you want it to say. and make sure it says good, accurate things. And that's hard to do. But just very briefly, the reason that's important is because in order to write well, you have to be able to think well. And thinking well is important because the world is complex. And so commit to the hard work of developing a sharp mind. That's not a waste of time. That's honoring to the Lord. That's part of what God calls all of us to as his people, and even as image bearers, to love the Lord your God with all of your mind as well. And so the writing process can enhance that and be an instrument in developing that. So commit to writing good papers. Attend your classes, polish your papers, turn in your assignments on time. Remember that you're ultimately not doing any of these things, not ultimately, maybe secondarily this is true, but ultimately you're not doing this for your professors. You're doing this work for God. He's called you to be a student at this time in your life. And if you think, well, maybe he hasn't, well, then you've got some soul searching to do. Then you have to figure out why you're here. If you don't think the Lord has called you to this task at this season in your life, then that's okay. Maybe he hasn't. It's not a sin not to be a student in college. But if you believe he's called you here, then you have to embrace all these activities and these tasks as, I'm doing this for him. I'm submitting these papers to honor the Lord, and not just for the sake of my professors who have assigned it to me. And so keep that in mind. Maybe, and again, I don't want this to be cheesy, but I wrote it on your handout. Go to class because you love Jesus. Write papers that would please Jesus. Study for exams in faithfulness to Jesus. Calls you. And also strive to be known as a reliable, responsible, and disciplined student by your professors and other students. It's part of what it means to just commit to the hard work of academic study. Be reliable, responsible, disciplined. Another thing under that we could say is commit to pursuing excellence in your work. And do this as an act of worship to the Lord. Offer your academic work to him. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody has to have a 4.0 grade point average. It simply means that you are doing the best work possible, given the circumstances in which you find yourself. To decide I'm going to go into this class, and what I'm going to aim for is a B. Why would you do that? Aim for excellence in the class. Invest yourself in it and do the best work you can possibly do. So your main aim for your speech in your communications class, which I think is it still speech 210 at Ball State University that everybody has to take? Okay, so you have to take a speech class. Your main aim as a Christian student in that speech doesn't have to be proving the deity of Jesus. To be honoring to the Lord. Your first aim is just simply write and deliver a good speech. That shows a faithfulness to the Lord. I think we just sometimes think we have to baptize all of this in some very distinctively outward Christian framing. That's not true. You will honor the Lord who's called you to be a student simply by writing a really good speech. About something you have to be passionate about, that employs the tools that your professors are equipping you with to be able to write and deliver good speeches, embrace those things, and just knock the speech out of the park, regardless of what topic it's on. And don't think that the only topic that's available to you as a Christian has to be explicitly biblical in some way. It doesn't. Just write a good speech. Let me quote from Dorothy Sayers, Christian author from a couple generations ago. She wrote, "The church's approach to an intelligent carpenter is usually confined to exhorting him not to be drunk and disorderly in his leisure hours and to come to church on Sundays. What the church should be telling him is this, that the very first demand that his religion makes upon him is that he should make good tables." And I think that's a helpful mindset to adopt as a student, that a Christian carpenter should make good tables and not sloppy tables that don't really work. And it's not a justification to make those sloppy tables as long as he shared the gospel with 3 or 4 people at work. That doesn't make it okay that those tables are no good And it doesn't do anything for Christian witness to make sloppy tables. So whatever it is, whatever field you're in, pursue excellence in that field for the sake of Christ. He was calling you to excellence in that. And then finally, embrace this season of preparation now as a way to serve others well in the future. It's true that you don't see the beneficiaries right in front of you of what your majors are going to qualify you to do and what you're going to be doing in your fields of occupation outside of university academic once you get done with this. It's true you don't see them, but they're real. And so don't make them pay for your incompetence now in not giving yourself the preparation at the time where they are in front of you. Does that make sense? Embrace the reality that you're serving people now that you just don't see. But you're going to be serving them. And you're either going to be serving them well because you've committed yourself to this academic discipline, or you're going to serve them poorly because you didn't invest yourself well in that. And I think the Lord is most pleased when you've invested yourself to commit to serving people now in the season of preparation, and you finally get to serve them more directly later. And so those are three things under you are a worker. You're not just a worker. Second thing I would say is you are a learner. You're a learner. I want to highlight one thing about being a learner that's really, really important. But the first thing I would connect this to is that's centrally what it means to be a disciple. To be a disciple meant to be a learner, to learn under Jesus. And so all of us as Christians are learners by virtue of being disciples. But the other thing that learning calls us to is it calls us to proper humility, and it produces it as well. But when you think of yourself as a learner, there's something about that that's humbling, rightfully so, that you're not in the position of teaching your courses. You're in the position of sitting under the teaching of others. You're a learner. And so adopt that posture with appropriate humility as a learner. So a couple things under this. There's a lot that you don't know. There's a lot that you don't know. And so be inquisitive. Have an open, teachable spirit. I want to read from you 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 32 through 34. This is an account of King Solomon, really at his apex. And it's telling us about Solomon's wisdom. And it says, Solomon also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. Solomon was a songwriter. He wrote proverbs, and he wrote a bunch of songs. And it goes on, he spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He spoke also of beasts and of birds and of reptiles and of fish. And people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. Now, what did this wisdom have to do with? Well, it's just these distinctively spiritual things, right? No. He observed, studied, learned about, and spoke about nature, the created world. He embraced all of that with an inquisitive kind of spirit, we would imagine. One commentator says this about it. He says, since God has left the fingerprints of God's wisdom everywhere, since there is no place where God does not furnish us with raw materials for godly thinking, Christians should be seized with a rambunctious curiosity to ponder his works, both the majestic and the mundane. And I think that's spot on. Which means you may have to take classes that are outside of your major area. These maybe core classes. I taught one of them, Health Science 160. But I have to take this class. Well, because there's truth and goodness and beauty to be learned about in that field. Whether it's your major or not, there's God's fingerprints to be detected and explored in those areas. And so give yourself to those things. So when I became a Christian, I was a really late bloomer academically. I graduated from high school. I had no intention of going to college. Worked for a little while and decided that, I don't think that I'm going to be able to do this for the rest of my life. So I enrolled at a commuter school in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Did that for 2.5 years, being pretty directionless in terms of what I wanted to do. A guy that I knew from high school, kind of in the exact same position that I was. We just decided, you know what, let's go down to Ball State, and let's just knock out our degrees and get done. We were spinning our wheels for about 2.5 years. So I arrived at Ball State, became a Christian my second spring here. Now, by the time I got to Ball State, I was 21 years old. So I was a little bit, I was in the maturing process. And so I had already recognized that devoting myself to studies was important. But I still would have seen that fairly narrowly. When I became a Christian in the spring of 1992, my experience was that every single discipline opened up as a pathway to learn about this God who had sought me and found me and claimed me as his own. I distinctly remember sitting in it was a geology class. I didn't know anything about geology. I still really don't know anything about geology. It was the only class I had in geology. And I just remember being captivated by the content and the expectation that I could learn something about God from this class in geology. And I would say I'm 55 years old now. So I would say in the past 33 years, because God arresting me and claiming me as his own, and now finding myself in his world and knowing the one who created this world, in the past 33 years, I honestly could say I could count on one hand the times that I would say I felt bored at all. Why would you be bored? There's the fingerprints of God to be discovered everywhere. You get to be in an academic institution of higher learning where you can learn these things from people who have devoted significant portions of their lives to these fields of discipline. They may not package it to you with Christian wrapping, but you can discern that. Like, you get to figure that out and to tease that out and to find it. How does this connect to who God is and the world he's made? What does this tell me about myself? What does this tell me about the world I live in? What does it tell me about the reality of goodness and grace and sin and all of these things? You get to throw yourself into that pursuit as a humble learner. And it's a wonderful thing. And so adopt that inquisitive, teachable, humble posture, expecting God to reveal something of himself to you in general revelation in the world that he's made through the study of these disciplines. Also, you're in class primarily to learn, not to teach. Though I would say you should aim to enhance the experience in the classroom for everyone by appropriate participation, whatever that would look like. So be a participant in class as much as that's possible. I know in some classes that might be a high degree of participation, in other classes maybe a lower degree. But try to enhance the class experience for everyone. Also, you can learn from unbelieving professors. You don't have to have a believing professor to adopt this posture of humility and an open, teachable spirit. You can learn in disciplines that are increasingly antithetical to Christianity. I apologize. I put, for example, anthropology here. I don't know who teaches the anthropology courses at Ball State. So I actually apologize for calling that out specifically, although I do know at many secular universities, the field of anthropology is aligned pretty antithetically to Christian ideas of what it means to be human. But even if that's the case, that it's severely antithetical to the way you think as a Christian, what you believe the Bible teaches about who we are and what it means to be human, learn as much as you can in that class, from that professor, and adopt the posture, adopt the mindset of 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 21. I wrote it on your outline here. Test everything and hold fast to what is good. You have an opportunity to do that in a class where your professor might be hostile to the Christian faith. You get to think, okay, What is what she is saying? What is what he is saying accurate? Where is it accurate? What is true about it? And what is not true about it? And you have to figure that out. To just say everything the person is going to say is false and therefore unprofitable for me is overly simplistic and almost always not true. So you have to say, okay, what is good in this? What is true in this? And what isn't? You do that. I just hold it up to the light of Scripture and discern those things. But that's beneficial for you, even to go through a process of discernment, to be faced with questions that you ordinarily wouldn't have been faced with in this classroom setting is good for you. I mean, thank God that you're in that atmosphere in which your mind and your heart needs to be stretched a little bit. And then you might have to go to some other people to find some answers. And so I'll get to this a little bit later about there are Christians in every field of academia, like solid, gospel-believing, biblically grounded Christians in every academic discipline, and they've probably written some stuff. And so go find it. How would a Christian respond to this? What's the biblical way of thinking? How would I counter this? Well, you might have to do some extra reading. And as a Christian student, be prepared to do some extra reading and extra work because you're a Christian student. It's not going to be easier for you, except that it might be harder for you to be a Christian, just like life is likely going to be harder for you because you're a Christian, because your Savior has called you to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow him. He's not called you a life of comfort. And so being a Christian student, your main aim should not be to stay comfortable and do less work than your unbelieving peers. Be prepared and willing to do more work than that to conform your mind to Christian truth if you're not getting it from the classroom. The last thing I mentioned under this point was show proper respect to your professors. And I think this was mentioned on the panel. I think Carrie used the language of honor. Remember that they have dedicated significant amounts of time and study. They've studied this discipline for hours and hours and hours. They have degrees or a degree. They've likely written a dissertation on this. So avail yourself to what they might have to offer you. Does that mean you have to agree with everything that your professor says? Of course not. I would say that if you have a believing professor, does that obligate you to believe everything that your Christian professor says? No. Be discerning, but be respectful and show honor and actually, try and sense some gratitude and express some thanksgiving for the labors that this person has done in his or her field that they are now teaching you. Even if you think the class maybe is a little boring or is hostile to your faith, okay, this gives me an opportunity to think through some things that I otherwise wouldn't. It's an opportunity for me to grow, to be stretched through this professor, being thankful for that. But certainly honoring professors is important. Be the last to complain about how hard a class is. And where you may have strong disagreements, bring them up respectfully and humbly, if at all. If at all. You may not bring them up. And that brings me to the third thing to remember. So first, you're a worker, so work really hard. Secondly, you're a learner, so be humble. Third, you are a witness. So there are times to defend the faith and to confront falsehood. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Now, of course, in this particular context, it assumes that someone's asking you to explain this hope. Well, that might have some connections to a classroom because you might have opportunities to dialogue. So there is a request or an environment in which dialogue and input can be shared. And so be ready. But probably just as importantly, if not more importantly, you need to consider not only what you would say, but how you would say it. So 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 goes on to say, yes, always be prepared to make a defense, yet do it with gentleness and respect. Always. as a Christian student to be harsh and callous and disrespectful is out of line. Don't do that. Yeah, but they were so hostile. They were so attacking of what I believe to be so near and dear to my heart. Yeah, I understand that. That doesn't justify disrespect. It doesn't justify cruelty or slander or an attempt to denigrate someone's reputation that works here at the university. And so the how is as important, if again, not more so, than the what. Now, it may be that you're not sure how to respond in that moment. That something very antithetical to Christian truth was said in the class, and you don't know how to respond to that. Well, as I said before, go find out what other Christians have said about this and are saying about this. But in that moment, if you don't know what to say, it's probably best not say anything. That's okay. If you don't know what to say and you don't say anything, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're unfaithful. It just meant that I hadn't thought about this. It's the first time I was confronted with this. And I need to think about this more. I need to think about how to respond. And you know what? The opportunity may not ever come again for you to speak into that context. That may not happen. That's okay too. You're not being an unfaithful witness. You're in a season of preparation. Don't waste that. Don't waste that occasion, however, by just letting the question die. Like, I didn't know how to respond to that. Let me go find out how I can respond to that, and if it ever comes up again, I will be more prepared. Take the long view. Nobody has all of the answers right away, all at one time. In fact, oftentimes, learning is prompted or provoked when we're confronted with things that we don't know how to do with, and we don't know how to respond to them. And so, go find some of those Christians in your field and find out how they would respond to some of the content that's been shared in the class that seems to attack Christianity. I would just say it's not altogether glorifying to God for Christians to give simplistic, poorly thought out answers to complex questions. It's not. And so if you can't provide a well thought out reply in a proper environment, you may not be invited to give any input in there, and that's okay too. But you got to deal with that. If I didn't have an occasion to respond to this. But if you don't really have a good, well thought out answer, it's probably better to be quiet in the moment and go figure one out. Also, under being a witness, don't be argumentative. Be gentle and respectful. I've got some scripture passages that support that. Don't return insult for insult. 1 Peter passage there in chapter 2 tells us that Jesus didn't revile back when he was reviled, and he did that to leave an example for us. And so you might be in a situation in which the Christian faith is denigrated and insulted in a class that you're in. You can counter that appropriately, but if your faith is insulted, or if you, as a Christian student, even directly are insulted, scriptural teaching on how to respond to that is really, really clear. You don't insult back. That's part of being a witness, right? Is that you don't respond the way others might be given to respond to that. And not only do you not return an insult for an insult, but that what you do return is a blessing. I can't remember who was talking about on the panel, but it's the importance of being a witness in your kindness to other students. Being honorable, honoring them, being kind and respectful is part of your witness as a student. It's not just, I've got to be Mr. Christian Apologist in my class to be a faithful witness. No, you don't. There's all kinds of ways that you can witness. And so one of the ways I would encourage bringing up Christian truth in classes where it seems to be dismissed, denigrated, or even outwardly attacked. Now, I don't know how much this happens. I mean, your students, maybe you deal with this on a semester basis. I don't know. But I would say that one thing you should think about doing is employing the art of formulating and asking good questions. That when you have something to say, think about how can I ask it instead of how can I just assert it. And if remember I said writing good papers is hard because it requires clear thinking. I'd also say asking a really good question is hard because it requires clear thinking. What precisely is it that I want to ask? But asking usually doesn't generate the kind of defensiveness that bare assertions will sometimes do. When I was you would think when I taught physiology and health science, I was mostly on the wellness side, I was mostly on the health science side. I was like, how often would explicitly Christian themes come to bear on what we were teaching? All the time. All the time. It's been a while since I've looked at textbooks on this, but when I was teaching, there was this wellness wheel, the dimensions of wellness. Spirituality was one of the wheels. And so I would just always invite students to try to define what they thought spiritual health even meant. And we would have dialogues and discussions about it. And most of the way I taught it was actually through questions. Human sexuality was part of that course. Substance abuse was part of that course. And so there's lots of things that we could, mental health was part of that course. So there's all kinds of ways that we could engage in content that my faith had a direct bearing on. I would often try to engage students with questions, and they wouldn't necessarily know exactly where I was coming from. And it was a way to draw them out. But as a student, you can ask questions as well as a way to draw other kinds of truth out and not get people to have this defensive posture as if you're... And asking a good question means that you need to ask it in such a way where you're not making an assertion and just veiling it with a question. Like, honestly ask a question that you want. What would those who hold the position that you're advocating here, what would they say to this? Okay, just as an abstract example. A more concrete example, I remember I would survey my students every year about their health attitudes and their health behavior. It was only the students in the class, anonymous, and I would share that data back with the class. Okay, here's what the rest of your peers think. I remember always asking a question about marriage and sexuality, about if a couple agrees that marital fidelity is not an important aspect of their marriage, there is no reason why they should not engage in extramarital affairs if they choose to do so. Agree or disagree? That was the question. Now, in 1999 and 2000, right in the middle of my teaching, the vast majority of students would disagree with that. Let me state the question again, or let me state the... If a husband and a wife agree that marital fidelity is not an important part of their marriage, there is no reason why they should not engage in extramarital affairs if they choose to do so. In 1999-2000, the vast majority of my students disagreed with that. And I would simply ask them, why? What is your basis of disagreement? Well, that's not really a marriage. Defined by what? This couple said it's not important for us. So therefore, there's no reason that they shouldn't do it. I was fine just leaving it the question because I believe that the answer to that question is, from a biblical view of marriage, they shouldn't be doing it. If you're going to define it biblically, which I do define it biblically, so if someone were to ask me, do I disagree with that? I'd say yes. but it's because I hold to a biblical view of marriage. If you don't hold to a biblical view of marriage, what's your objection? Exactly. Now, I don't know what a student is going to do with that information. I'm just asking a question. And so a question that might come up in depending on what kind of class you're in, oftentimes we hear that the only prerequisite for engaging in a sexual relationship is valid consent. That's all that's required, right? Two consenting adults. If those prerequisites are met, everything is fine. So here would be a question I might ask. If some of those things and a more progressive idea of sexual ethics is being presented in the class, I would just say, why do you suppose that there's not a strong movement to legalize incestuous relationships? In other words, if you have a brother and a sister, one's 30, one's 28, and they want to get married and have a sexual relationship, which, by the way, in most states is illegal, I believe. But why do you suppose there's not a strong push to legalize those things? I might even rephrase it this way. How is that not an infringement on those people's rights? And if they want to have multiple husbands or wives, which I think many states still have restrictions on that, how is that not an infringement? Aren't we still talking about consenting adults here? Oh, now I would say any of this, but what's prompting the questions in my mind is, so in reality, most of us believe that the prerequisites go beyond merely two consenting adults. There's actually more than that involved. And who gets to say what that more is? And that's a legit question. Now, my position as a Christian, who gets to say what those parameters and prerequisites are for having a sexual relationship? God is. And has God made those known? As a Christian, I would say, yes, he has. Where has he made those known? He's made those known in Scripture. But I would say to faithfully engage in that as a student, raising the question is a good start. And you don't even have to necessarily answer it. You just raise the question. Make people think. It's part of what you want to do yourself as a student, is to commit to thinking, and to thinking critically, and to help other people think critically. And I would say, in that example I just used, it makes your Christian convictions a little bit more plausible when you expose the reality that what people assume they think the only prerequisites they hold in their own mind are not actually the only prerequisites they're holding in their mind. It makes the fact that you hold other prerequisites a little bit more plausible. Or at least it might open up a conversation, and that's a good thing. One final exhortation I would offer is don't do homework on Sundays. But rest in faithfulness to God. I know not everybody's going to agree with me on that. And I also know it's difficult because I know that some professors give a test on Monday at 8 o'clock. So I would say in those situations, think of your Sabbath as a sundown to sundown thing. And so begin your rest on Saturday night, put your homework away, don't do any of it, and don't do any of it until Sunday at 8 or 9 o'clock as you start looking forward to what you have coming up the next week. I think that day of rest is a powerful witness in a culture and an environment that rarely stops to rest. Well, that has it out of balance, I guess I would say. It either is resting way too much or resting not enough. God has told us to do our work in 6 days and to rest on the seventh. So have a day where you don't do any homework. Now, I will say as a Christian student, you know what that's going to require you to do probably? Is you're going to do more homework on Saturday a lot of your other peers are going to do. But so that that allows you to set aside the Lord's Day as a Christian student and bear witness to that. And so I'll just close with this: being a college student is a great, great privilege. You are at an institution of higher learning. What a wonderful privilege that is. So don't waste that. God has given you this wonderful privilege, but that privilege comes with responsibilities as well. God has called you to that. And those responsibilities include: be a hard worker who pursues excellence, be humble and dedicated in your learning, be a respectful and faithful witness. All right?